This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Hello, this is Stuart Address, and good morning, Moscow. Oops, I forgot we're still in the U.S. Anyway.
Good morning, comrade.
Yes, das vidanya. Anyway, in that vein, this is the Memorial Day weekend holiday, and I thought I would say a little something about that before we get into things, and actually tell a brief story that may be more appropriate for Veterans Day, but I'll use it here anyway. I know that my family is planning on having a nice pool party and barbecue on Sunday. My mother, my sister, who are watching right now on Facebook Live, my girlfriend, who's there too, so I know we have an audience, her parents. So it's going to be a whole mishpaka, as they say. And I hope that everybody, whatever your plans are, and I hope you have wonderful plans, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. But whatever you do, I hope that at some point this weekend, the thought at least passes your mind that we're able to do this because of those who have given the ultimate sacrifice in giving us their lives in defense of this country. And that goes way back to the Revolutionary War and even before. It's good to keep in mind that while we're all having fun, there are families of deceased veterans who may not be having so much fun. And we need to keep in mind that we're able to have this fun because of the sacrifices people have made. Now, I know, frankly, when I was of age, and there wasn't a draft, thank goodness, I was terrified about the prospect of military service. I just don't think I'm cut out for it. But that doesn't...
See, there was a draft when I was in school.
Yeah. That doesn't diminish, it actually enhances my respect for those who served. Because I don't know if I could have done it. And I don't know if I would have come back, frankly. But, I had a case, this may have been 5 years or maybe even longer ago, where a vet came into the office and his complaint was that, and I'm going to name names here because it works out well, that deputies of the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office banged on his door, said they had a search warrant, they were looking for somebody else, and he asked to see the warrant, and they said, we don't have to show it to you, either let us in or you're under arrest. So, figuring he'll fight the battle later, he let them in, and, his wife's sleeping in the bedroom and not, completely fully dressed. And, he wants her to have an opportunity to get dressed. But, of course, they want to search because they're looking for somebody. And, didn't get violent or anything. Nobody was hit. Nobody was punched. But there were lots of threats made about, stay quiet, be still, or, you're going to get arrested. So, ultimately, they didn't find anything and they left. And this happened about midnight.
Oh, man.
So he went and he filed a complaint at the sheriff's office. And as it turned out, there were a number of problems here. First, the warrant, and I'm going to give an example because I really don't remember. Instead of saying 4321 Main Street, said 1234. Now, there are cases about that. That's a common error. And
no way. Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, God.
But it was even worse here. Instead of saying 4321 Main Street, it said 123 Elm Street. Okay. I see we have a call. Let me just finish this one line of thought, and I'll get to you, John. Even worse, instead of saying 4321 Main Street, it says 1234 Elm Street with a different town within the county, not Fort Pierce. Now, how did the deputies make that mistake? Because they listened to a dispatcher tell them about the warrant, they didn't have it in their hands. The sheriff department's policy says that if you're executing a warrant, you need to have it with you. And if somebody demands to see it, they have a right to see it. So a lot went wrong here. And perhaps if the policy of having the warrant in your possession had been followed, none of this would have happened. But anyway, the story gets better, and we will tell that part of the story after these questions from John on line 1. Hello, John. How can I help you?
Good morning. Good morning. I look forward to your program every Friday.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I have a question for you. I have a niece, worked her way through college, BU, and then University of Chicago.
2 great schools.
Yeah, she's now 61 in August, and she has Crohn's disease. She's dealing with it, but she lost her job about a year and a half ago, and she's been living off her savings. And she has, the only thing she has left is an IRA, and she's already paid like $2,000 penalty on it. Maybe for a withdrawal, I'm not sure.
Perhaps.
But yeah, they told her that she cannot touch a dime of it for another 10 years. And I guess she has 7 years left to wait. And she's, certainly in need of the money. It's very difficult for her to get a job now at her age,
Right.
health-wise. Does she have any recourse? Is she bound to that?
All right. Let me first give a disclaimer. I'm not a financial consultant, and I don't pretend to be. But
Yeah.
depending upon how she is holding that money, she may very well have recourse. Now, if she's holding a bond, let's say, and the bond cannot be cashed in for a certain period of time,
Yeah.
then she might not have recourse.
Okay.
If she's holding it in stocks or mutual funds or things like that, then as long as, and at her age, I don't even think there's a penalty anymore. She's how old again?
60.
All right, so I mean, there's probably still a penalty unless
Yeah.
it's used for medical expenses, things like that. There are a few exceptions. But if she was willing to pay the penalty and willing to pay the taxes on it, you're able to get at your retirement funds at any age.
Yeah.
Now, again, if it's held in a form that has its own restrictions that you've agreed to in advance, that could be the only hang-up.
Okay. All right.
So the first thing to do is have her find out how are these funds held?
Yeah. I'm assuming that she has, and she's bound to this so-called contract or agreement, whatever, they term it.
And sometimes there are provisions in the original agreement that you executed for early termination, and you pay not Uncle Sam's penalties, but you pay their penalties.
Right, right.
A lot of mutual funds do that. If you pull out early, you have to pay.
Right, exactly.
Pay a fee.
Pull out within 90 days, things like that, yes.
You got it.
She said she's already paid penalty, and I'm not sure why and how that occurred.
Those are the things any lawyer would want to know. And, if you're going to a lawyer as opposed to a financial analyst, and I'm not sure that would be the right first thing to do, they're going to want to see a statement and see how the assets are held.
Well, she lives in Maryland, right outside of D.C., Gaithersburg.
I went to law school there, so I love it there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I went to law school in D.C.
Now, let me tell you a little experience I had. Ready for this, Greg? Is Greg with you?
Yeah, Greg is with me.
Okay. I'm driving on Route 1 headed north towards Prima Vista, and I picked my sweater up off the seat, and I'm looking at it, and a police officer pulled up alongside of me, and he said, "Pull over." And I said, "No, it's a cardigan."
Oh, God.
And he got very upset.
All right, folks, we're on Facebook
Say
Live.
good night.
Facebook, good night, Gracie. Thank you, John. Okay, for those on Facebook Live, I will repeat this. He says he's driving on US 1 towards Prima Vista, and he's looking at a sweater that's on the seat next to him. And a cop pulls up and says, "Pull over." He says, "No, it's a cardigan." Ha, 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 ha.
Brutal.
Those are my kind of jokes. All right, so to finish this story, so the client of mine, he doesn't want a lot of money. What upsets him, as he relates it to me, is he had served both in, I guess, West Germany, and he had served on the DMZ. Dangerous places. His father had served, his grandfather had served, a military family. And as he said to me, I fought overseas to defend these types of rights. I come home and the police burst into my house at midnight without a warrant. I'm angry. Look, I may not have ever served, but that story, instinctively, I felt his anger and his frustration.
Oh, yeah.
And so I did one of my wonderful, probably 10-page demand letters to Sheriff Mascara. And at that point, I had only met Sheriff Mascara once. I had met him, I had deposed him in a case where a woman was abducted by her ex-boyfriend from IRSC. And when they found them and they sort of surrounded the car, she got out and she ran and she jumped into Mascara's arms. So I was deposing him as to what her state of mind was, and that was the only time I had met him before. And I get a call from Sheriff's Counsel, who I also knew, Adam Federman.
Sure, know him well.
And he said, "Sheriff would like to meet with you and your client and see if discuss this." And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right. He wants to come in his uniform, with his gun belt, in his sheriff's vehicle, and intimidate my guy. But it doesn't hurt to talk. So I said, all right, the four of us can talk. And Adam says, he'll even come to your office. All right, now that was impressive to me because, he's obviously in Fort Pierce and I'm in Stuart. And there's certainly no obligation for him to come to me. But he offered and I accepted. I did fully expect him to show up in his uniform with the gun and the sheriff's vehicle, a sign of power, force, intimidation. He didn't. He showed up in his private vehicle, in a suit and tie. I'm sure he had a gun on him, but it was not visible. You would have mistaken him for a businessman. And that impressed me. So the four of us sat down, and Adam says, do you mind, the sheriff would like to say something to your client first. Now, okay, all the alarm bells go off in my head, all the red flags. All right,
Yes.
here comes the effort at intimidation.
Is this being recorded, this whole conversation?
No, it's a settlement conference. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure I should be saying this much, but I don't think anybody will sue me because it works out well. And he says to my client, "This never should have happened to you. I'm sorry." Wow.
Whoa, right off the bat?
Politicians don't do that. I wish they would. Right off the bat.
Wow.
He said, "My officers did not follow policy. I am going to make sure that policy is followed in the future. What can we do to make this right for you?" Well, of course, I wouldn't let my guy answer. I don't want him to undercut himself. So I said, "Excuse us," and I take my client into my office. And I said, "Well, what do you want to do now? I mean, this isn't exactly what we expected." And he says to me, a lot of clients say it's really not about money. And it's BS. That's our civil justice system. It's about money. It wasn't really about money to him. He was one of the few. He said, "I appreciate the apology. I'd like to get it in writing. I'd like the officers who stormed into my house to sign it as well, an apology. And I'd like something that promises that the departmental policies will be looked at in effort to improve that this won't happen again. And of course, we want some money. I need to get paid, right? But the amount of money we asked for was a heck of a lot less than that was in the demand letter. Because of the apology, because of the way he treated my client, because he came to us, because he came in a suit and tie, because he came without the police vehicle, because he didn't come with a gun evident, although I'm sure the sheriff always has one. And so this was a perfect example of things working out well when both sides proceed in good faith. It was also a great example, in my opinion, of the sheriff, who I really do like, admire, and I'm sure he's not perfect. And I've sued his department a few times since then, so it's not like, I don't believe they can do wrong. They certainly can. But I believe his heart's in the right place, and he tries. And so my client accepted much less money than we thought. We did get a written apology signed by the sheriff, signed by the two deputies.
Wow. Okay.
And it wasn't even to be confidential. It could be used however my client wanted to use it. If he wanted to take an ad in the paper and publish these apologies, he was okay to do that, which he didn't. But it wasn't restricted. It wasn't like, here's the apology, but you have to keep it quiet. So I gained a lot of respect for Sheriff Mascara at that point. And my client was satisfied, and the anger and the frustration and all the emotional issues that were burning inside him, they disappeared because it was handled right. So, again, that story is probably more appropriate for Veterans Day. But I tell it to you now as we get ready to enter into the Memorial Day weekend, because we have those who have sacrificed. We have vets that are obviously, a lot of vets that are living, a lot of vets that are in bad shape. And you want to know something? They have amazing stories to tell. I've only heard a couple. The ones I've heard, each time they touch me, because each time I feel you should not be treated this way, especially after what you've done. So I guess that's my little story, my little spiel, and my little wish for all of you to have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. But remember what it's really about. All right.
Yeah, and I lost a lot of buddies in Vietnam. And, and just the whole scene of when a lot of my friends came back in L.A. was just outrageous the way they were treated.
And apparently, while it's gotten better, it's still pretty bad for a lot of vets. I represented the vet who kept going to the VA. I guess it's in West Palm or somewhere in that area.
Yeah, it's in Riviera Beach, a huge one.
His appointment was canceled when he got there, rescheduled, went, canceled again. It's not the way you treat anybody, but it's not the way you treat a vet. It's just not.
I know Congressman Mast has opened an office inside the VA center.
Really?
He's the first congressman ever to do that. And, of course, obviously, disabled as well. And he has said, we're going to change some things.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not a fan of Congressman Mast, but that's a great thing to open an office right there in the VA. I give him credit for that. Everybody has to handle certain issues. If that's an issue that is close to his heart, obviously, then maybe he can accomplish things where others have failed. And every show seems to go into politics these days, but Republican or Democrat, if he is able to accomplish something where others have failed, go for it. I'd support it. Things that need to be done should be done. This public works bill, interstate, highways, tunnels, bridges. I mean,
Do we need anything like that?
no, we don't. We're okay. My goodness. I don't care if it's 2 trillion or 1 trillion or 500 billion, because I'm not familiar enough to know how much is really needed. All I know is that everybody agrees that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Oh, and my goodness, guess what? If we do it, a lot more people can be employed. So, I mean, look, if the president wants to brag about the current employment statistics and unemployment rate, I guess he's entitled. I don't give him all the credit, but I guess he's entitled. After 2 years, he's entitled to take credit. But look what more can be done. And the Democrats agree. Everybody agrees. So why can't it be done? It makes no sense to me, and I think it is why many in the population often say, let's get rid of all the bums. I don't blame them. Here is something everybody agrees on. Here is something that clearly benefits the nation, and probably every single state within it gets a benefit. Here's something that will employ people. Why isn't it being done? It makes no sense to me.
It's just very toxic there.
And if it's that toxic, and I know it won't happen, but I hate to say then, get rid of all 535 of them and bring in new ones. That's the House and the Senate. And of course, it's not just there. It's the president saying 2 trillion, then the chief of staff not liking it, so now he can't do it. But in terms of the blame that Congress shares, if they won't do what's right because of politics, get rid of them. I agree. Get rid of them. If my Democrat loses a seat and it's taken by a Republican, I don't like that. But if he loses a seat because he's not doing what he's supposed to do, I guess I can't really complain. And it goes both ways.
And it was very interesting. I was reading that apparently Ted Cruz has introduced a bill for term limits, two terms for senators. And, when you start looking around, especially in the Senate, and seeing these guys that have been there for 40 years, I'm sorry. It's...
You and I disagree.
Really?
I've studied term limits in college.
Oh, okay.
And law
This
school.
is cool. Okay.
No, I disagree. I don't disagree 100%, but I disagree about 80%. Okay? I can see the possibility of some term limit in the House. Okay? It's considered the People's Chamber, sort of like the House of Commons in England.
Okay.
I can see, 5 terms, 10 terms, whatever it is. Can't be there more than 10 years, 20 years, whatever. I can understand that philosophically. The Senate, though, until recently, has always been considered to be the more deliberative body, the body in which, regardless of whether you're Democrat or Republican, you truly consider legislation and try to work across the aisle. And again, until recently, that was fairly true, because the Senate is where a lot of things happened that the House couldn't do or wouldn't do, and then the Senate would put pressure on the House to pass their version of the legislation to get things done. In the Senate, I don't really think a term limit is appropriate, even if somebody has served 42 years. If they're serving and they're not doing their job, vote them out. But if they're serving and they are accruing the historical knowledge of the body, of its workings, of its intricacies, of its technical rules, and they begin to know how to use it for the advantage of legislation and the people, then I don't think you want to toss them out and bring in freshman legislators who now don't know all these arcane rules and know how to use them and have to start from square one. It's like you don't want to take the guy who's been working on the space shuttle for 35 years and fire him because he's making too much money and hire the guy right out of MIT. You just don't want to do it.
I get that, but when you have a lot of 80-year-olds sleeping on the job, that bothers me.
I do agree with you, and so let the people vote them out. That's their right.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You know, the House is supposed to be a more fluid body. And while not everybody in the House has aspirations for the Senate or for the presidency or for a governorship, a lot of them do. If after a certain period of time you can't get yourself into the Senate or wherever you want to go, move on. Okay, move on and get some new blood in there. The House was designed to be a much more raucous body, not one like in other nations where you're having fistfights, as you see on TV and other legislators,
especially in Turkey and places like that.
But it is supposed to be the more raucous body, and it is supposed to be the more parochial body. So the representative from the Treasure Coast is supposed to have the Treasure Coast at heart. Now, he's supposed to have at heart the nation, too. But he was sent here by the Treasure Coast, and he can't sell us down the river. The Senate, you represent the entire state. And there's only 2 of you for each state. Your idea is to have your entire state at heart, and, of course, the nation. And since it's a much more deliberative body, you should be able to focus more on what is best for the country, because usually what's best for the country will be best for your state.
Your operative word was should.
You're right, should. And when you don't, vote them out. I mean, that's just, where I come from. A lot of them probably should be voted out. Right now, nobody is working with anybody, or almost nobody. And, if there's a crime of obstruction of justice, that's obstruction of legislation. It's fundamentally unfair. It is a violation of the oath that every single one of them took. So maybe they should all be impeached. Either work together on the things you agree upon and get some great legislation passed. And on the things you disagree, if you agree on A, B, and C and disagree on D, E, and F, pass A, B, and C.
Can a congressman be impeached?
Yes.
Really? And there's an actual,
I'm not sure if it's called impeachment. The Congress can vote to expel.
I know they censure people, but...
Well, censure is like impeachment. It's the word. To expel is like convicting in the Senate for impeachment. So,
okay.
But you don't go to the Senate. If the House wants to expel a member, the Constitution provides them with absolute right. Supreme Court's not going to review it. Congress is in charge of whether to seat a member and whether to expel a member. And so it's rarely done, of course, and it should be rarely done. But, if a censure doesn't work, you can vote to expel a member. And, maybe these things should be more common than they are, although, God forbid, not political.
Yeah, no.
I mean...
We've seen enough of that.
And that's the fear, that it all becomes political, and that this is why politics is such a dirty word. When I was in high school, politics was not a dirty word. Politics was a favorable, honorable word. And it still means what it meant back then. It's the politicians that have often turned the word politics into a disgusting, vile concept.
We had a guy who was mayor of San Diego, very popular, by the name of Pete Wilson. Pete wound up rising through the ladder. He became governor of California for a while, and then senator. And I remembered seeing him after he had served almost a full term, and he just talked about how it's just totally ruined his life. And, you just have to wonder.
I used to want to go into it. I thought I was going to go into it when I was in college.
Really? Okay.
Well, we used to joke. There were 2 of us at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers. We were undergraduate associates in our senior year at the graduate school.
Is this like Tom Eagleton?
No,
That family?
no,
Per chance?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's the graduate school at Rutgers, and you always hear the Eagleton Paul. Well, that's where. It
Oh
comes
yeah,
from.
yeah.
Well, there were two of us in my undergraduate associate class who vowed that we were going to be future senators from New Jersey. And we would each say, no, you can't be because I'm going to be, and this one is never going to leave, so there's only one spot. Yeah, I really did think I'd get into politics. I didn't. I went straight into law and I stayed there. In some ways, I'm happy. In some ways, I regret it.
What about your buddy?
I have no idea. And I'll tell you right now, honestly, swear, honestly, I believe I can do better than 3/4 of the ones that are there right now. I really do.
Yeah, it's
You
so
know.
frustrating.
I just think that do what you can do. If you can't do it all, do what you can do. And when it comes to the infrastructure bill, oh my goodness, everybody agrees. It'll pass the House 430 to 2 with 3 abstentions. And it'll pass the Senate 99 to 0. Okay? Get a piece of legislation that you, the House, and you, the Senate, agree upon, Republicans and Democrats, send it to the president and dare him not to sign it. Really. Either he'll sign the darn thing and we'll have an infrastructure bill, or he'll veto it and
Override
he'll
it.
definitely be out of office.
Oh, just override
Well,
it.
right, and if it's so popular and it passes both houses of Congress, by those margins, because you cooperate and you get a bill that everybody can live with, then you're right, override the veto. And I hate to go into politics here, show the chief executive that the legislative branch is a co-equal branch of government and the Constitution delegates it with certain authority, including override your darn veto. You can't just say no, 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 and expect that you're going to get your way. Congress has rights. And let me tell you something. They're all co-equal branches of government. I'm sorry, there's one branch that is not so co-equal. That's the judiciary.
I was going to say Supreme Court. Yeah.
Everybody thinks, oh, well, gee, Trump just put on 2 conservative justices. They're going to vote his way all the time. Historically, that is not the way it works. Maybe on Roe versus Wade, I'm afraid. But on other things, they don't vote the way of the person who put them in the position.
Well, and you hear the real conservatives now saying that the 2 guys that they put in are voting with the liberals, supposedly. Yeah. I mean, it's gotten so absurd.
If the subpoenas get up to the Supreme Court, I have confidence that the Supreme Court is going to do what it did in Watergate and say to the president, comply. And then what does the president do? Is he not going to comply? Well, talk about a constitutional crisis. I mean, then you have a dictatorship if you're not going to listen to the Supreme Court. I mean, what would have happened if Nixon said, I'm not turning over the tapes? I don't know. What would have happened? You can't just march into the Oval Office and drag the guy out. I mean, he'd be impeached and he would have been convicted. That's why he resigned. And I guess no matter who feels what, if the Supreme Court were to order certain action and the president was to refuse, maybe then you'd have Republicans standing in line to say, okay, let's impeach and let's convict. Because at some point, you have to stand up for the framework of our government, which is 3 branches of government. And if you don't, then you don't belong where you were elected to serve. That's simple. Now, that's been my diatribe, my monologue. Folks, you haven't called me.
They don't want to interrupt you now.
John called me. Thank you, John. Yeah. But I feel so alone, so unwanted, so unloved. 340-1590. We still have 20 minutes left. Give me a call. And anyway, let me move into a little sexual harassment case that is in my office right now. I will change the names to protect the innocent and even protect the guilty.
But not sexual harassment in your office.
Oh gosh, no.
Well,
legally,
I wanted to clear that up.
Legally, there can be no sexual harassment in my office. I do not employ 15 people. I am legally incapable of sexually harassing Cheryl, and Cheryl knows it. And you know something? That's a problem we run into. We had a call yesterday from somebody whose company employs 13 people.
Oh, you weren't kidding.
No, I'm
there
not
is
kidding.
a limit.
15.
I didn't know that.
Now, you can have 13 full-time employees and 4 part-timers equals 15. But it has to be the equivalent of 15 employees over, I forget how many quarters is in the last X number of quarters.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. All the statutes have numbers. For Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, it's 15. For the Family and Medical Leave Act, it's 50 employees within a 75-mile radius of where you work. They all have numbers, and they're all different. And, for example, the 15 was designed, the intent was, we don't want to overburden small businesses with too many discrimination suits. So we're going to leave it at 15. Now, would I quarrel with that number? I would, as a plaintiff's attorney. Do I believe that you should go down to 10 or maybe even 5? I do. Below 5, probably not, because then it becomes, a way you can run a business out of business. Anyway, we have Ronald. Thank you. Somebody heard me and is calling. Ronald on line 1. Hi, how can I help you?
Hey, Mr. Stewart, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
That Trump is something else, that story. Oh, boy, what a joke. Wouldn't you need to have some proof before they do that?
Do what now, impeach?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you shouldn't be impeaching without proof, and you certainly shouldn't be convicting without a lot of proof.
That's true. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Anyway, that ain't reason I called.
All right.
See, I like that talk you had there about Trump. That's nice. Good information. Anyway, I'm talking about I have a problem with my eyes from my eye doctor. I can't see what one or anything like that. How long do I have to file a suit or anything on that?
Well, if you're talking about possible medical malpractice,
yes,
you have 2 years. From the
2 years, okay.
From the time you knew or reasonably should have known that there was a problem. And medical malpractice is also a peculiar statute in Florida where you can't just go and file suit tomorrow. I don't handle medical malpractice, but I do know from my colleagues that do, before you can even file suit, you have to get 2 doctors. Whoa, boy, I'll blow out my own eardrums. You have to get 2 doctors, experts, who will certify that the doctor in question engaged in practices that were below the standard of care. Now,
I've got 2 doctors already.
All right. Now, if you get a medical malpractice attorney, that attorney will get affidavits from those 2 doctors, and with those, he or she is legally entitled to file suit. Until you have those, you can't file suit.
Well, one doctor I was going to, and I had this problem. Then he sent me to another doctor. Now, the doctor I had, he went 3 or 4 times. It was free. And then the last time I went, he wanted $70.
Right.
So I didn't go back to him.
Okay.
And now I was wanting to see, maybe you said about 2 years I had?
It's 2 years if you believe that something was done that was professionally negligent.
Right. Yeah, so it's been less than 2 years.
Well, if you think that something is going on that might be medical malpractice, I would suggest you contact an attorney that does practices in that area, because they're much better able to advise you than I can, but I do know the statute of limitations.
Well, that was the main thing I was asking you about. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr.
Well, thank
Stewart.
you for calling. I appreciate it.
All right, have a good day.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
That's interesting. 2 years then, huh?
Right. And you have hoops you have to jump through.
Well, I would think med mal has got to be ridiculously complicated.
Well, with all the move for caps and things like that, It's become more complicated.
I'll bet.
Everything, even in my area, everything gets more complicated these days. Okay, discrimination is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the Florida Civil Rights Act. Before you can file suit, you have to file a charge of discrimination with either the EEOC or the FCHR, Florida Commission on Human Relations.
Okay,
Typically,
I gotcha. Okay.
Typically, you file it with both because they have different remedies and you want to file suit and have the advantage of all the remedies. If you go to a lawyer first, you're going to dual file. And if you go to a lawyer after you filed with one body, not the other, he's going to make sure you file with the other.
So is this filed in a state court or a federal court?
Oh, you file in either, but if you're asserting a claim under Title VII, the defendant has the right to remove it to federal court.
Oh.
Because it's a federal question. Usually I file them in federal court.
Okay.
I like federal court better. Not always, but usually. So you have to file a charge of discrimination. Now, there's a statute on that too. In Florida, you have to file a charge of discrimination within 360 days, not 365. 360 days of the last act that you're complaining about.
Okay.
And wait too long, and half of the discrimination you're complaining about, you may not be able to assert or get damages for. Okay? And did I say 360?
Yeah, you did.
It's 300.
It's 300.
300,
So what, are they taking weekends off?
I guess.
You
And then what you do is, at some point, you get, technically it's called a letter of determination. Lawyers call it a right to sue letter. Because you can't file suit until you get it, so we call it a right to sue letter. And then once you get it, you have 90 days to file suit or you're done. You have to move quickly. We have people call us and say, I have 1 week left, and it's like, I'm a solo practitioner. Call a larger firm that has time to put multiple people on this, because you need to file in a week. I'm not going to work that fast because I got to make sure I believe you have a case, and it's not frivolous. So, we don't entertain those. And for whatever reason, people have sat on it. All right, but anyway, so let's say now you've jumped through these hoops. You've gotten your letter of determination, your right to sue. Well, why didn't it get resolved in the EEOC? You know something? When I first started practicing law, you filed your charge of discrimination with the EEOC. An investigator was assigned. The investigator sent the lawyer a letter saying, I've been assigned. The investigator sent your charge of discrimination to the employer, and a response had to be forthcoming. The investigator then contacted me and would say, essentially, this is what the employer says. Do you want to submit a reply? Is there any witnesses I should interview? And then the EEOC makes a determination. They have 3 boxes. We conclude that there is basis to believe discrimination has occurred. We believe there is no basis to believe that discrimination has occurred. And the 3rd box, we don't know. We can't figure it out. Now, in the olden days, one of the first 2 boxes was typically checked. Now, it's virtually never checked. It's all, we don't know. And by the way, if you couldn't understand it on the radio, that's because I said it in a way you couldn't understand. We don't know. Why? Because the EEOC no longer has the staff or the budget to process discrimination complaints.
You got to be kidding.
I am not kidding.
Oh, God.
We can't even get the EEOC on the telephone most of the time. We can't even get an investigator to call us back most of the time. So we resort to waiting the required time and then sending a letter saying, send us a right to sue letter. We're done with you. They haven't done anything. And that's the shame of it. Because the administrative agency level, which is a barrier, a gatekeeper, let's not say a barrier, a gatekeeper.
Gatekeeper, yeah.
Before you file suit and clog up the courts, used to work. They would have EEOC mediations. And often we would settle. There'd never be a lawsuit. Now, to the EEOC's credit, it doesn't always work that way. Next week, I have an EEOC mediation in West Palm Beach. I have a case in which the EEOC did what it's supposed to do and suggested to both the employer and the employee, let's have a mediation, see if we can resolve this. And so we're going to go do that. When's the last time I had an EEOC mediation? Before I opened my own practice. So more than 15 years ago.
Wow.
It doesn't happen.
Now, is this because of federal cutbacks?
Yes.
Oh, man.
You know, I understand. Look, I'm not going to blame Trump for all this. Because this was before Trump. This was even under Obama. It was under Bush. It was under Clinton to some extent. So it's an equal opportunity. Y'all screwed up here. You know, every Congress, every president has priorities. And they're going to shuffle the budget to the extent they're allowed in whatever way they think appropriate. I accept that. And I accept everybody can't get everything. But if you're going to pass a Civil Rights Act, at least give the administrative agency staff to investigate. Don't make it a joke. And that's what it is now. I say the EEOC is a joke, not because the EEOC is a joke or any of the people who work there are jokes. It's a joke because it doesn't have the tools it needs to function effectively.
Well, we had some interesting things with the FCC with pirate broadcasters.
They also don't have the staff and the money they need.
Going back to Sheriff Mascara again, when there was a complaint filed by a local general manager here, and the FCC simply said, we don't have the staff. We've lost our field offices in Florida. We're now out of Atlanta. Have your local sheriff handle it, and Sheriff
You know who else doesn't have the staff? The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Oh, God.
After the crash on Wall Street, the SEC still does not have the manpower or the funding to investigate stock manipulation and insider trading. How could that be?
We don't have to worry about the Russians. All these cutbacks have affected every form.
Isn't that a truthful statement and a horrific statement at the same time?
Oh, yeah. It's absurd.
You know, this is, folks, this is Memorial Day weekend, and we're running out of time soon, so it's great. I never get to where I wanted to go, but that's okay. Let me give you my perception. It's my honest perception. This is a great country. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. The opportunities in this nation to advance, improve, achieve are extraordinary. The colleges and the universities, and it's just wonderful. Yet within our system, at every level of our system, the president, the Congress, legislature, judiciary, administrative agencies, we have failures. Okay, now, do we all want to be taxed twice as much? No, I know we don't. But if we don't fund certain fundamental aspects of our government, then we really can't be heard to complain when they don't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to give my own little plug here. It really has nothing to, well, it has a little to do with government incentives maybe, but my own little plug here as we're into the school year. Who else do we not give tools to anymore? Teachers. From kindergarten, perhaps all the way up to 12th grade, because colleges and universities are more on their own. When teachers have to buy crayons, when they have to buy copy paper, when they have to ask, parents for pencils or Kleenex, what the heck? When I was a kid, oh my, now you know how old I am, right? I used to go to school in 6 feet of snow. No,
Yeah.
when I did sometimes.
It was more than that.
Yeah.
Oh.
When I was a kid, my mom's listening. Mom, call if I'm wrong, if I'm remembering wrong. When I was a kid, parents were not asked, we need this. Can you give us this? They had it. When I was a kid, every kid had his own textbook and you could take it home. Now textbooks stay at school. How are you supposed to study if the textbook is at school? It's a crime. Why are some other nations, some others, surpassing us in education? Part of it is their model. Part of it is their commitment. Part of it is funding, and a priority of the government. And part of it is that those parents and those students care more and work harder. Not all of them, but some of them. We need to fundamentally overhaul our education system, and not with the current Secretary of Education, let me tell you that. But we do. Teachers cannot be made to teach to a test. Teachers have to be able to teach. And if a student is slower than others, they get extra help. But the average and the better students cannot be held back because you're teaching to the lowest common denominator. And you can't not teach. I know a certain English teacher. You can't not teach Shakespeare and other great writers because the state test is coming up. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with a teacher being told, if X percentage of your students don't meet this benchmark, you may not have a job next year. So you're teaching test-taking skills? If there is A, B, C, and D, look for the one that is clearly ridiculous, and then look for one that really seems odd, and from the other two, look for the best ones. I could teach my kid that. All right, it looks like I'm hearing the music. I rant a lot. Anyway, everybody have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, really. And next Friday, we'll be back again for Ask a Lawyer and maybe some more rants for me. Have a great weekend. This is Stuart Address. Bye, Cheryl. And if you want to call the office, it's 781-8003. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Ask a Lawyer right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. WPSL.com, webcaster to the world on Alexa and Google Home.